This is a BBC podcast. You can get all our podcasts and our terms of use at bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Hello, I'm Jo Fidgen. Welcome to The Y Factor.
I'm mixed ancestry, Native American and African American. You know, I probably was called a red nigger more times than I can name. When I was very young, my black elders would give me the rules that you don't argue with a white person, you don't contradict a white person, you certainly don't do it staring them in their eyes. Real violence and the threat of violence were everyday parts of living.
This week, an explosive question. Why are people racist?
I have a daughter, and when she was 4, she came home and she said, "Mommy, what are white people?" So I gave her what I thought was a good answer, and then she started asking about people who I guess were exceptions, you know, a fair-skinned black person, and she said, "Well, is she white?" And I said, "No." And then I realized in that one moment what we call the social construction of race, that basically we teach our kids what it is, and so they absorb our reality of what race is and what racism is, who is us, who is them, who we're supposed to like and who we're not supposed to like.
This is Dr. Ruth C. White, a professor of social work.
I've taught in the area of race and ethnicity for over 15 years.
In your years of studying this, have you come up with an answer that satisfies you as to why people are racist?
That is a very, very good question. No one answer satisfies me.
It is a huge question. All we can hope to do in the next quarter of an hour is bring you some of the possible explanations from the fields of psychology, sociology, genetics and history. So what is racism? The US Civil Rights Commission defines it as any action or attitude, conscious or unconscious, that subordinates an individual or group based on skin colour or race. It can be enacted individually or institutionally. In this programme, we're mainly going to be talking about racism directed at black people. American David Pilgrim remembers the tail end of the Jim Crow years in the United States, when black and white people lived entirely separate lives.
The Mobile, Alabama, where I grew up, and then later Pritchard, Alabama, were so rigidly segregated that, you could almost make the argument that whites were in some way a rumor, because we were confined in large part to an all-black community. You just didn't have a lot of interaction. And so whites were like this mysterious group of people that people feared or quite frankly hated.
Would you say that the racism you suffered made you a racist?
You know, I don't know. I mean, hatred's such a harsh word. I remember when there were people throwing things at us, and I mean literally throwing things, not just hurling insults. And there were fights on the way to school and back, and it was like a 2.5-3 mile walk. And I mean, that just went on for the entire year. I guess if you would have said to me at that time, I mean, if you had asked me then, did I hate them? I certainly would have said yes. If you had asked me if I were racist, probably would have said, well, if I was being honest, I probably would have said yes. I mean, there's a big debate in the U.S. and around the world about whether or not minorities and other subordinate groups can be racist. I'm in the minority again because I argue that they can, and whether they can or not, they can certainly hate whites. And it can be a defensive hatred or a retaliatory hatred, but it's something, whatever you want to call it, something greater than dislike.
As a boy, he became interested in items that depicted African Americans in derogatory ways, some of them ordinary household items.
I collected my first piece. They used to have these traveling carnivals, resort-type pieces that they were also flea markets, with vendors. And I saw a mammy, like salt and pepper shaker, a couple cents or a nickel or something. I bought it and broke it in front of the person. I just didn't like it.
What offended him was the caricaturing of African American women as mammy figures.
If you think about the large, dark-skinned black woman in a movie like Gone with the Wind, she is a servant. She's content, actually happy to be a servant, prefers the company of her white superiors to her black peers. At one point, I would say Mammy was the dominant anti-black caricature of women.
After smashing his Mammy's salt and pepper shaker, David kept on buying objects he found offensive, but he didn't smash them anymore. Now he has 10,000 items in a museum he founded, the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia. The Jim Crow era ended in the late 60s, but the museum's collection just keeps on growing, with some of the newest additions denigrating the US President Barack Obama.
I don't mean objects that simply disagree with his politics, certainly, but I mean ones that show their disapproval of the president in ways that are traditionally racist.
Can you give me an example?
T-shirts were created by various companies showing the president as a monkey.
You're a sociologist. Why are people racist, do you think?
Oh, my goodness. That's a great question. I have like 100 answers. One is I believe that racism is functional. I believe that attitudes, tastes, values, and behaviors are repeated when people get benefits from them. So there must be some function. I mean, people are prejudiced, they get an ego massage out of it, or they stand to benefit from the subjugation of some other group.
So perhaps part of the explanation for racism might be that it's about who's in and who's out of your particular group.
Hi, I'm Joseph Harker.
Assistant comment editor of Britain's Guardian newspaper and former editor of the weekly Black Britain.
My mother is white, my father's black.
How do you define yourself?
I define myself as black. And I went to a predominantly white school, and I was abused for my race from the age of 5 or 6. Even small children were picking up visible differences to make their group associations and to have in and out people at that time.
How did that make you feel about your own skin?
It made me feel distinctly inferior. And at the time I went through kind of quite a lot of angst over wishing I was white because I wanted to fit in. And you do internalise it.
The extent to which we absorb racist messages was demonstrated in a famous experiment conducted in 1939 in the United States by psychologists Mamie and Kenneth Clark. Its shocking results helped persuade the US Supreme Court to end segregation in schools.
Which is the good doll? Why is that the good doll?
It always be good and listen.
And which is the bad doll?
That one.
Why is that
Classic
the bad
Clark doll studies that had young children, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think, and they asked these black children to choose which doll they preferred, a black doll or a white doll.
A majority preferred the white doll, attaching more positive qualities to it. This is a 2009 rerun of the experiment by ABC News.
Which is the pretty doll?
That one.
Why is that a pretty doll?
Because I like the color white.
Which is the ugly doll?
That one.
Why is that the ugly doll?
Because I don't like how it's brown.
And which doll looks most like you?
I would say that one.
Why?
Because I'm brown, but I'm mixed up with white and black. But I'm not mean.
Dr. Ruth C. White, author of Culture in Mind, explains how pervasive racism distorts our normal way of thinking about ourselves.
So my group, whatever my in-group, is good, is special, is great, is wonderful, and your group is not. However, if you live in a society that teaches you that who you are is not pretty, not good, not valued, then the normal psychological process of, imbuing yourself with great characteristics and being wonderful and having a great self-esteem is no longer there.
But go under the skin to our DNA, and how different are we really?
In the scheme of things, humans are very genetically similar. In fact, on average, any two humans share 99.9% of their DNA identical.
Dr. Garrett Hellenthal is a statistical geneticist at University College London.
So there are differences among groups, but even much of this genetic variation is shared among groups, or what you might call races or different ethnicities, and what kind of varies from group to group is the frequency of these different mutations.
So in that 0.1% where we might be different, what kind of information might that 0.1% be carrying?
Things like skin color, eye color, and then also, in some cases, disease resistant. For example, there are mutations in Africa that give you increased resistance to types of malaria. And then there's other genes in other parts of the world, for example, the lactase gene, that gives you an increased ability to process milk products. And that exists at higher frequency in some part of the world, in Europe in particular, than in other parts of the world.
That's worth saying again. The main differences between us genetically, apart from our physical appearance, are our ability to resist malaria and to drink milk. Not much there for a racist to go on. And then there's the study Dr. Hellenthal and his colleagues have been working on, testing the DNA of people sampled from 95 populations around the world and mapping where their genes have come from.
So in about 80% of the groups that we looked at of these 95, we did find clear evidence of past mixing occurring in the last 4,000 years. In the other groups, in fact, in most cases, I would think it's due to the fact that we hadn't sampled enough individuals, so we didn't quite have the power to see. I believe that most groups are intermixed.
So does it make sense to talk about racial purity at all?
So in some sense, no. I don't think there is necessarily many, at least, what you call pure groups.
Dr. Hellenthal's genetic map shows how many mixed children have resulted from slavery, colonialism and war. On the more positive side, trade has encouraged us to move around too. Whatever the reason, we've been mixing it up for thousands of years, leading some to worry that their race will die out. Is there any genetic basis for thinking, for example, that at some point in the future there'll be no blue-eyed, blonde-haired people left?
Say you're looking at eye color, you might inherit the blue variant or the blue mutation from one parent and then the brown eye mutation from a different parent. And one of those is dominant, so you would have brown eyes in that case, but you still carry the blue allele, and you could potentially pass that along to your offspring. And if somebody else is carrying a blue mutation as well, they can pass that along. And then again, your child would have blue eyes again. So the frequency of these physical attributes might go down a bit, but those particular mutations that encode these things are still around. They're still in you.
Are there any genetic grounds to support a racist perspective that one race or one group is superior to another?
No, yeah, absolutely not. No, there's no best gene that you want to have. In general, I think humans adapt so well to different environments with the same genetics that toying with their genetics isn't really necessary.
Toying with genetics has a long and inglorious association with racist regimes. Most notoriously, there was a policy in Nazi Germany to sterilise anyone considered to have bad genes, including criminals, homosexuals and the insane. And apartheid South Africa also argued along discredited scientific lines that whites were superior to blacks and enforced a rigidly segregated society. 20 years after the end of white minority rule, stand-up comedian Trevor Noah can now look back and laugh.
My mother's a black woman, Xhosa woman, born in South Africa. My father's Swiss, from Switzerland, so he was a white man. And so my parents got together during this time, which was against the law, but they didn't care. And they had me, which was illegal. So I was born a crime, which is something they never thought through, I feel, because as a family we couldn't live together. And I grew up in the township. I lived with the black side of the family. We lived in Soweto. And even there, people treated me the same. They welcomed me into the community, even though I was the lightest thing for miles, you know. It was, no, really, it was me and an albino from a few blocks away. And to the point where people would give directions using me as a landmark. They would, yeah, you see the light boy, you turn right there. No, he's at that corner, you'll see him.
In apartheid South Africa, there was a hierarchy, with whites at the top, then Asians, coloureds or mixed race, and blacks at the bottom. You see the same thing in other parts of the world, and within races. Skin lightening creams sell very well in parts of Asia and Africa, where the paler your skin is, the more attractive you're considered to be. Back to comic Trevor Noah. He encountered a different kind of racism when he visited the United States.
There's a man in Kentucky. He came up to me after a show, and he said, "Well, ain't you a little m***er?" I said, "Yes, and a little white. Well spotted." Well spotted, yes. I have no time to be offended by those things. You can't offend me by like that. You have to work a bit harder to offend me. I require like effort if you're gonna. Because I'm from the home of some of the best racism in the world. I'm a snob when it comes to racism. You gotta do your thing. You know, don't just think you can throw a word at me and then that's it. No dogs, no tear gas, nothing. Just a word? No, come on. Put your back into it. Give me something, you know?
The thing is, none of us would make a casually offensive remark like that American, would we? We're not racist, are we? So can someone be racist without realising they are racist?
Yes, they certainly can. If you live in a white supremacy society, the people who are just, if I can put it in quotation marks, they're just doing what they normally do. Their normally do impacts me negatively in such a way that they get rich and I stay poor. So here you are, you're sitting in your office somewhere and you don't think of yourself as an oppressor because you are removed from the impact of your actions.
Who gets the best jobs? Who goes to jail? Who drops out of school in your society? Individuals might insist they're not racist, but perhaps they are if they subconsciously reflect the values of the society they're in. British journalist Joseph Harker.
We're more and more that media deliver this message and pander to this message and reinforce these negative images, the more and more racism will grow. I've done content analysis on the output of British newspapers, and what I found is that when covering Asian people, stories are 3-to-1 negative to positive, because nearly all the stories are concerning terrorism in the last few years. When it's white people, it's 3-to-1 positive to negative. The problem is when it comes to minorities, the only stories we ever get are those kind of extreme stories. It might be a black gang of muggers or something like that, because editors know that playing to fears plays very big.
So there is clearly a market for this then. People will buy a paper that sells a racist message.
Yes, they publish more of what the readers want. They make an assumption that readers are racist on an almost daily basis. It's no longer polite or acceptable to be seen as a racist. But what we have now is a kind of proxy racism where we don't attack people's race, we just attack their culture. So it's, I don't oppose you because of the colour of your skin, I just oppose you because of your religion or your language or the clothes you wear or the food you eat and these kind of things. But everything that goes along with their history and their culture is denied and is seen as inferior. And so it's just a modern day version of the old racism trope, just still very active and still at work.
We started out asking, why are people racist? But maybe that wasn't the right question. It's clear that you can't talk about it for long before you run up against other types of prejudice. So maybe the better question is, why are we prejudiced? I feel another why factor coming on.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.